One update we do have is that Jared Curtis is officially signed with Vanderbilt. 5-star quarterback Jared Curtis, a guy who we've talked about how much the talent is spreading out. 5 years ago, there's no way Vandy gets this kid away from Georgia, but he does flip from Georgia to Vanderbilt. We're seeing his highlights here live on our show. I mean, let's talk about the impact here for Vanderbilt. Vandy landing a 5-star quarterback and beating out Georgia.
Say it with your chest, bud.
But, I mean, like, the sport has changed so much. This is awesome, to
Incredible.
be honest. Like, more people care now because their team have a real shot.
Our good friend and former colleague, Barton Simmons. I was on a panel with him this summer. We were talking about recruit rankings, how that impacts player valuation, and it was me and Barton. And Barton's like, hey, we aren't in the market for these 5 stars. We're not after the best of the best. And yesterday, after Tom Lloyd broke the news that Jared Curtis was leaving Georgia and headed to Vanderbilt, I texted Barton. I said, hey, man, turns out you guys are in the market for these 5-star players. And he says, well, it's easier to recruit when you win 10 games. And look, I think this makes so much sense for both parties here, for Vanderbilt and for Jared Curtis. Jared Curtis, the most ready-to-play quarterback in the class of 2026. He's got a big, thick frame, right? He can make all the throws with his arm, and we got away from the dual threat pro style tag. I think most people, when they see Jared Curtis, they don't realize he is a power runner. So he fits into the offense that Tim Beck runs. Is he going to be a pit bull like Diego Pavia and carry the ball 30 times? No, but he can be a guy that you can use on designed runs, and we'll see what happens with Diego Pavia. Maybe he gets an extra year, but it's clear Jared Curtis is going to have the opportunity to come in and be a day one starter. That is not the case at Georgia. Gunnar Stockton, former blue chip recruit, former All-American, he has come along. He has been an assassin at times for the Bulldogs, so Vandy wants to remain in the national spotlight. College game day was there. Jared Curtis was there. How do you do it? You go out and you get, a quarterback that everyone knows. When we talk about Vanderbilt football moving forward, it's going to start with Jared Curtis. It's just like Dylan Raiola when he went to Nebraska. I keep saying, we can create a Mount Rushmore right now of Vanderbilt football. You're going to have Diego Pavia on there. You're going to have Jay Cutler on there. And we can put Jared Curtis. He hasn't even played a snap, but he's keeping Vanderbilt in the headlines.
It's just a tremendous win for Clark Lee. I mean, people kind of scoffed at it when I said program changer, and I just think that's what it's going to do because it's going to change the future trajectory of this program. They're 10-2 this year. Diego Pavia is having a great season. He's a Heisman contender. But I just think Jared Curtis is going to elevate this program so much more over the next 3 years because he is a 3-and-out kind of guy. I don't want Ivins to get upset with this, but I genuinely think he's the best pure passer I've seen in this entire class. I've seen him a ton in person, been to his games, going to go to a state title game on Thursday. This kid is just different, and he is an absolute monster. He throws the ball at such a high level. He's accurate. He's got touch. He genuinely has everything going for him. And like you said, he's athletic. He runs the ball well.
Former running back.
Yeah,
he's a former running back.
That's what's kind of crazy about this whole thing, too, because he's just been on this rocket ship ever since. But great job by this staff. And again, we're already seeing, I know Jamarcus Shepard, the receivers coach at Alabama, left to become the head coach at Oregon State, but we're already kind of seeing a ripple effect here. I expect Owen Cable, if he hasn't done it already, I expect him to flip to Vanderbilt. He's committed to Alabama. I think he's going to end up being a Commodore. And this right here was the needle mover. Guys want to play for players like Jared Curtis because they're future number one overall pick kind of guys and Heisman Trophy candidates. And I get it. Everybody wants to scoff at the fact that Vanderbilt's not going to win a national championship. There was Georgia people basically taking shots at why would you go to Vandy. Jared Curtis is the kind of guy that puts them in that discussion.
I mean, if you're Tennessee, Auburn, Mississippi State, they're new annual opponents in the SEC. 5 years ago, if you got Vandy as your annual opponent, you're like, sweet, we can rack up an SEC win. Now you're like, oh, come on. They just had Pavia, and now they're getting this kid?
Well, I remember a young Andrew Ivins was in the swamp when Jay Cutler took the Florida Gators to double overtime, and he was a one-man show. That is not the case moving forward. We talked about these windows for programs, and Vanderbilt is now in this window where they can get aggressive in the high school ranks. Remember, Diego Pavia comes from New Mexico State. Eli Stowers comes from New Mexico State. Last year, Vanderbilt, I think they were 70th in the recruiting class rankings. Now they're knocking on the door of a top 25 recruiting class. So I think we're going to see more of this in terms of teams that break through, and then they parlay it into success when it comes to roster construction, right? They can get a little bit more aggressive in the high school ranks. They can get a little more aggressive in the transfer portal. So Vanderbilt's hot right now. And the other thing, you brought up the annual opponents. Go ahead and circle that Vanderbilt-Georgia game in 2026. I don't know if that's where that game is being played. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of noise when Jared Curtis is introduced.
You know, we mentioned this earlier. Like the portal, it's not dry, but it is drying up a little bit because of the advent of these multi-year contracts that these high school kids are on. It's a little bit harder to get out of some of these high school contracts if they're multi-year now. So I think we actually are kind of having a bit of like a resurgence of the importance of high school recruiting. You can't just go build your entire roster every single year from the portal if fewer and fewer elite talents are actually available in the portal. You'll always be able to go pluck kids from the G5, from the FCS, like the rare D2, but there's just not as much talent in the portal now as there was 2 and 3 years ago. So I think, Ivan, you could speak to this more, but like high school recruiting is probably now just as important as it was maybe 10 years ago when there was no portal.
Yeah, and the analogy has been, and what it's turned into is high school recruiting is the NFL draft, right? And the transfer portal is free agency. You guys watch the NFL. We all watch the NFL. America watches the NFL. You have to hit on your draft picks. Yep. And not, yes, you have to hit on the first and the second round and the third round. But you look at the Kansas City Chiefs and the run they were able to have. They were very dialed, and they got a lot of value out of those guys that they got in the 5th, 6th, and 7th round. I think the same thing applies to recruiting. And look, Georgia is a prime example right now. Georgia is living in a completely different world, right? Georgia, I said it at the front of the show, this is the first recruiting cycle since 2017 that they haven't signed multiple 5-star players. They've been impacted. They can't go out and they can't draft these 5-star difference makers up front. So they are having to kind of adjust their operation, and I still really like their recruiting class. They held on to P.J. Dean, defensive lineman out of North Carolina. That was a
huge
big
win.
one. That was a big one. South Carolina was in there. I believe safety Blake Stewart out of Woodward Academy. He's set to announce picking between Vandy and Georgia. that's a potential difference maker. Excellent senior season. So these teams are having to adjust expectations and how they go about, getting that 105.